Welcome to Women Who Code, who do Tech Talks too. This is our first time doing this. We're really excited. I'm Karina Zona, and this is Michelle Totolo, and we organized this event for Women Who Code.
Thank you.
We're really excited by the turnout. Last week, Suzanne asked me, how many people do you think will do this? And I was like, well, we've never done something like this before. Maybe like 2 speakers and like 10 audience, something like that. And then, how many actually signed up in the end? 80?
65, I think.
Okay, I'm way off on the numbers. But yeah, a little bit more than 10. So, one of the things we hear a lot from conference organizers is we don't know like any women to speak, and how would you find them? And they don't seem like there's enough people who are interested. And I think these people and you people both prove that's really, really wrong. And we're going to make sure that you're ready to give some talks to conferences or whatever level you want to be talking at. So first of all, we want to thank EngineYard for hosting. They did it on really short notice and gave us carte blanche. Thank you so much, EngineYard. And we can't help but thank O'Reilly Media and especially Suzanne Axtell, who helped make all this possible to be able to videotape this so people who aren't here tonight can start learning from these expert speakers. And we're going to be doing this again, so there's going to be another panel to keep on learning from. Have I forgotten to thank anybody? Well, thanks, Michelle. Huge thanks to Michelle.
Thanks, Karina. She was the one that started all of this all on her own. I couldn't even
No, she's lying. Is there anything else you could think of before we begin? Oh, schedule. Okay. So what we're going to do is 30-minute moderated discussion based on the questions that you guys provided and some other ones. Then we'll take a break so they're not under these huge hot lights for too long at a time. And then we'll come back and we'll do another 30 minutes. And hopefully, if you're wanting to, this will be an opportunity for you guys to add questions and have some discussion with them. And then we will break and we will do breakout sessions where you'll have the opportunity to get some time in with them personally and do some mentoring on various topics, all of which they've essentially chosen as their particular thing they're really excited about. So we'll be breaking up into various rooms. And then finally, we'll come back here and have a few final words. And also, we will be raffling off all sorts of goodies. Yes. All right, so let's begin. We have one speaker missing, which is why this chair is empty. But hopefully, we'll be able to add Pamela Fox in a little while.
Just imaginary hair.
Yes, meanwhile, Suzanne is going to, yes. Pamela does not have the long hair. Anyone who knows Pamela knows there's no long hair. All right, shall we begin? So let's start with some introductions. Suzanne Axtell is with O'Reilly Media, and could you tell us a little about yourself, Suzanne?
So I'm now doing marketing operations, which is more internally focused. It used to be externally focused. I'm also the informal diversity outreach person. So that's why I'm here.
And Adria Richards, would you introduce yourself a little bit about what you've been doing?
Sure. So I'm a developer evangelist at SendGrid. And that's a company that's based out of Boulder, but I live here. So I talk with developers all day, go to a lot of hackathons and conferences. My passion this year really has been to help people embrace learning to code like I have. I just spoke twice this weekend about it. I'll be speaking at South by next year, so really excited to be on this panel.
And my name is Ipsheeta Furtado. I'm based out in the East Bay. I have a software development consultancy called FTW Group. I've been speaking for non-technical leadership things for a long time with Society of Women Engineers. But this past summer, at the end of this past summer, I gave my first talk at HTML5 DevCon. That was my first software tech talk.
I'm Tracy, and I'm the founder of Wedding Lovely. It's my own startup. I was a designer, and I picked up Python and Django in order to build Wedding Lovely. Last year, I've done a couple conference talks, and I've done a few small ones, but I'm still very new to doing conference speaking. So I've been trying to do more. So that's what I did.
I'm Sarah Mei. I am a senior Ruby developer at Pivotal Labs, which is a consulting company here in San Francisco. And I've done Karina asked me to count, I've done about 30 talks over the last 6 years. Some of those were meetups, sort of smaller, this counts, this is one. But I also have done for fairly large audiences. My largest one was probably earlier, oh god, it's December already, last month I did a keynote at RubyConf, which is the world's largest Ruby conference, which is not a whole, like, it's 700 people, so it's not a huge number of people, but that was really fun, and it was really good, and it was, I mostly do talks about Ruby and JavaScript and coding in general, sort of communication issues around coding, and also teaching programming.
All right, so let's start off. There's some jargon to throw around in relation to speaking, so let's start off by defining a few terms. What is a brown bag talk? All right, so this is like the lunch type stuff? Yes.
Oh, yes, okay. So at Pivotal, I've been holding these lunch workshops for people. So people, it's not so much brown bag because I order in sandwiches, so sort of the opposite of brown bag. But we come in for an hour, and we talk about, lately what I've been doing them on is stuff like how to prepare a CFP for a conference, how to come up with talk ideas, how to, stuff like that. So it's like a little more workshop-y usually. Sometimes they can be more sort of Q&A format or presentation format, but the ones I do tend to be a little more workshop-like.
Who's done a lightning talk? All right, Ipsheeta, what is a lightning talk?
A lightning talk, so the definition has changed over the past couple of years from my understanding. But when I first witnessed a lightning talk, it was a series of talks, back to back, and people get about 3 minutes to do them. And they're generally like 5 to 10 slides long, and cover a topic that is completely unique to that individual. It doesn't have to be about the conference, it doesn't have to be about the group. It's really just a way for someone to give a specific description of something they've learned or something they've experienced or they think. So I gave a talk which was 15, 20 minutes, which isn't the same style, but it was also considered a lightning talk.
And then we have Ignite talks, and Suzanne, a number of O'Reilly conferences have those. Can you contrast that with a lightning talk?
Well, so the Ignite talks are based on I've heard it pronounced two different ways, either Pechakucha or Pachachka. And it's a very controlled environment. It's 5 minutes, 20 slides that automatically advance after 15 seconds. So it's very structured. But it's similar in that it's whatever you want it to be. It's whatever your passion is. It doesn't have to be about the conference or where you are.
And then there's also Birds of a Feather. Yeah. And what is that?
So I don't know if that's unique to O'Reilly or not, but we do have evening informal presentations, and it's a chance for people who maybe aren't speaking at the conference or who want to explore a topic that they don't see on the main schedule. And it's just an informal, anyone can sign up during the conference and anyone can show up anytime and they can lead, or it can be a roundtable discussion. So it's similar-ish to a brown bag.
Yeah, other conferences, I've seen that at other conferences too.
So that also sounds like an unconference. Has anyone been to one of those? Maybe you can tell us what an unconference is.
Sure. An unconference, I've actually had to organize one before, which is harder than it sounds. But an unconference is where a group of people come to meet, but they don't necessarily know the agenda beforehand. And the agenda is set at the beginning of the day or at the beginning of the session. And there are a few caveat rules to the entire conference. One of which I remember off the top of my head is the rule of 2 feet. So you're able to attend the session but also leave, and that's not it's not a statement of whether you approve or not of the session. It's really just about what you want to learn and what you feel you can contribute to. So it's kind of a anti-conference model, I guess.
There's a really great unconference called She's Geeky that's in the Bay Area that's organized around women and geeky stuff. So not just programming, but games and hardware and all that, anything that you can find is geeky, which is usually in January. So you guys,
25th through 27th.
There you go.
Suzanne's on top of
I just got my invite.
All right, Sarah, you brought up the term CFP earlier. Define, please.
That stands for call for proposals, or call for, in the academic world, it's usually call for papers, but in the sort of less academic world that I usually run in, it's mostly call for proposals, and that's when a conference opens up a public announcement that they would like to have speakers come and speak at their conference, and they want people to propose topics that they would like to speak on. So it's usually, basically it's a web form. You go and you fill out here's what I want to talk about, here's the abstract that you could put in the program, and here's some more information about me and what I do and why you should pick my talk.
Okay. So when you propose, there's an abstract, and I think this is a good one for Suzanne to explain a bit.
Well, we usually have two abstracts. We have a long and we have a short. And the short one is actually the one that ends up on the website if the talk gets chosen. So if you do submit a proposal, and I hope that you all will, for our conferences, just keep that in mind that will be public. And so it's basically a complete description about what the talk is going to be. And it is everything from what the audience is, what the talk will cover, what you're expected to learn, things that you might need to know before you get into the session itself, and maybe some other things that you need to know.
So have you all written abstracts? Okay. Is that your experience of what an abstract is and what you need to put in it? Or do you have any conferences that have done things a little bit differently?
So I was on the PyCon planning committee. We're going to be attending in 2013. And so interesting, because sometimes as someone who submits a talk, you're not sure what happens behind the curtain after it goes there. But it turns out that with PyCon, they actually will look at all the talks and they will give the submitters the opportunity to actually adjust or improve their talks if they feel content is missing or things aren't clear, or if you're asking for a certain amount of time, like let's say 45 minutes, and how are you going to use that time? Also, they may bump you back to like a 20-minute slot. So it was nice to see that they actually had built into the website a way to communicate with speakers to correct the abstracts and then wrote the longer summary.
So you mentioned bumping down to a 20-minute slot. When you propose, do you typically know how long your talk is, and do the conferences know how long your talk is?
Usually.
For O'Reilly, our form has you can indicate which one you want it to be. Is it a 3-hour tutorial? We call them, we have keynotes or plenary sessions, tutorials, and regular sessions, and sometimes we have shorter sessions of different lengths, but they're usually about 45 or 50 minutes, and you choose which category you'd like it to be in.
Adrian, you looked like you were shaking your head.
Oh, well, so for South by Southwest, and this will be next year will be my 4th time talking, twice solo and then twice with panels now. But I know folks who submitted, maybe they asked for the regular longer slot, but then this year, South by has a very large group of future 15s, as they call them. Usually they're focused on a future sort of topic, visionary topic, and I think it's the largest number we've ever seen. Just really a lot of talks. But so people who had spent for the longer ones, some went into there. One fellow I know, though, who works a lot with APIs, he actually applied for a future 15, but then was asked to do a workshop, which would be a couple of hours. He felt a bit overwhelmed. I made some introductions to other developers so they could co-teach it. And so he's going to be taking that workshop slot.
Right. So that's. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that happened to me at Fluent last year. I submitted a talk about Backbone.js, and they asked me to do a workshop instead. Because they thought that a workshop, they had a lot of people that wanted to, like, sort of the intro level Backbone.js, something longer than an hour. So instead, I did a 3.5-hour workshop, which was a lot more work.
So that's what I was going to say. The program committee has pretty wide latitude to say, right, we'd like to squeeze you in, or can we pair you up, or will you do this length of talk rather than another one?
So let's define that term as well. Program committee.
So, and again, I speak mostly from O'Reilly media experience. We usually have program chairs. Often it's 2 people, and then they invite members of the community and their network to also weigh in on the conference proposals and do outreach to get people to propose and to help with the scheduling.
Sarah, I know you've also served on a program committee. Has anyone else here that opportunity you had to? So I'd like to hear from both of you what that experience is like. Why don't we start with Adrian?
Well, it was interesting. So I am working on Ruby on Rails, so not really much of a Python person, but I thought, how can I contribute? And this is an opportunity to do so. It's actually kind of interesting. We don't talk to each other via voice at all. We use an IRC channel. We have a bot that collects our votes. And in an hour, we usually can cover about 10 talks. Well, one of the things that I found interesting, especially when it comes to women in technology, is that I see a lot of the guys, because a lot of guys in there, they really do try to give women the chance. So while you may think, oh, if I submit that, they'll say, oh, I'm a newbie, or they won't like my topic, there are email threads that occur where they're like one guy, someone submitted a talk about Python and fashion. And so there was a discussion thread last week. What happens if this really said Python and NASA robots? And he actually rewrote it because he was trying to take out kind of the view about and how people may feel about fashion, to really just look at, was this talk going to deliver to the audience? So.
And Sarah, what was it like when you were doing it? What was your role?
I was on the program committee for the Golden Gate Ruby conference a couple of years ago, and that's a much smaller event. It was at the time about 200 people, and there's a 2-person organizing team. So basically, like, we all had dinner one night, and we looked at there was a Google Doc that it's also a local conference, which helps because everyone's here. So the call for proposals was done with the Google Docs. People would like fill out this form. So basically what we did is we had dinner and we opened up the spreadsheet that the form had gone into, and we just kind of went down the rows and looked at, like, there were some that were like sort of people hadn't put a lot of thought into them, that were kind of sort of like usually like, okay, there was like a set that were obvious, like we should take these. There was a set that was obvious, like probably not, and then there was a set that was like we need more information. So then we would go and like the head of the program committee then went like emailed each of these people that were sort of in that middle group and was like, so we need a little bit more information to figure out whether we want to do this talk. And so it was often things like, have you ever done this talk before? Or, could you do it between now and then as a practice run? Or like, so it was sort of and the process was, it's a single track conference, meaning there's only one room. So it's not like multiple rooms to choose from during each time slot. And so the conference, the head of the program committee was really interested in getting a good mix of speakers in the one track. I think one track makes it a little bit more challenging because people can't choose. You can't have anything boring because usually if it's a 2-track conference, right, one's boring, people can go to the other one, right? So it was a lot of like, oh, well, I would love to have this person give a talk, but the one they proposed is a topic that we already have accepted a talk on, so maybe we should email them and see like if they can do a talk on a different topic, for example. So there was sort of that kind of thing as well, and it was a much sort of, I felt like it was fairly informal, sort of like, well, what do you think about this one? Well, what do you think about that one? What do you think about that one? And then this year I wasn't on the program committee, but the program committee had asked for my opinion about some talks that they were considering that were from new speakers. And so I gave him feedback on, like, because they were mostly people that I knew or knew of or had seen before. So he just wanted my opinion on, like, whether they would give good talks. So the program committee people do go out and, like, gather other information. And I felt like the Golden Gate Ruby Conference program committee really did a great job of, like, when they first went through it, this year anyway, they anonymized all of the submissions, so they didn't see the name of the person that was submitting it. And so they were able to pick out a set of talks that I think was different than if they were looking at the names, because the Ruby community is fairly small, right? So sometimes it's like, oh, we should pick this talk because it's from this famous person. Like, it doesn't sound very good, but he's usually a good speaker, so we'll take it anyway, right? So if you don't have that, then sometimes, and if you don't do that, then sometimes you end up with it feels like you end up with a more interesting slate of talks. And this year, I think the Golden Gate Ruby Conference had 25%, something like that, talks by women, which is great, and certainly better than what we've had in past years. So,
Adria, I saw you nodding through some of that. What part of that were you responding to?
So, the submission process, the topics, right, they do want variety. That's one challenge for organizers, which is orchestrating, especially for a single track, an experience. I've been to conferences where everything seems to flow so smoothly, and you're like, oh, that's a nice play off the last talk. And others where you're like, these don't go together. Kind of if you were having dinner and who put these sides together. And then also corresponding with the potential speakers, one of the things I wanted to mention is whenever possible, please record your talks. Even if you do it on an iPhone, if you do it on just with your audio, you can do that. Do whatever you can to get recorded and then put it online, even if you feel embarrassed, because those are things when people Google for you, they will look for that social proof to evaluate if you're going to be a good speaker or not. So YouTube is a really great platform. So.
Yeah. And a lot of conferences, especially the smaller ones, will have like a section in the call for proposals. It's like, what other stuff would you like us to know? Please include links to previous talks, videos, audio, slides, whatever you've done. Like they want anything you can give them that's like reassurance that you're going to be entertaining. That's really what they're looking for, right? You're going to be entertaining and people are going to enjoy your talk.
Does it matter what quality or length the video is, and does it need to be of your talk or of a previous tech talk?
I don't think it needs to be it doesn't need to be of the talk you're proposing. You don't even have to have written the talk you're proposing, let alone given it before. So I think mostly what they're looking for is like confirmation that you're not going to just get up there and like freeze and mumble for half an hour, right? Like they just want to make sure that you can do this.
For the O'Reilly conferences that do require that, and some of our conferences do require a video. It can be anything. You could be just in front of your computer recording a pitch for it, but they just want to see that you won't fall flat on your face when you're in front of the audience.
All right, so do you need to be an expert to do a tech talk?
Absolutely not.
No.
Are you an expert in any of the topics that you have spoken about? Some of them, right?
We like to believe so.
You know, I've given 2 talks as a beginner. Like I don't give the 2 talks I've given. Like I said, I picked up Python and Django. I did a blog post about that experience of learning Python and Django. I am still very much a newbie. I'm a lot better than I was 2 years ago. But when I was accepted to these 2 tech conferences, like I was talking to Ipsheeta, I was confused about what a pull request was today. I'm still very much a newbie when it comes to tech. But I was able to speak at DjangoCon and PyCodeConf about the experience of learning Python. So I definitely was not an expert. I guess I can say I was an expert in learning. But I mean, in terms of being a programmer and speaking at a programming conference, it was very nerve-wracking to be up on stage and be like, these people all know way more than I do. But I spoke about the experience of learning and that specific process. So I wouldn't say that you have to be an expert. You just have to be really entertaining and give a good story and probably be informative.
Yeah, some good takeaways. And it's known that imposter syndrome is very prevalent, where you're sure that you're going to be discovered. That's, someone's going to say, you don't know what you said you know. But I was talking to someone earlier that let's take a look at people who were building the first spaceships. Pretty big expectation. Can you build something that goes into space? Yes, we need a human in there who has to come back in one piece without being cooked. And we know you haven't built any spaceships before, but they still accepted those contracts. So keep that in mind. And also we can always think of like used car salespeople too. They know they're probably selling a car that there's stuff done, that there's sawdust in the engine. They're just not telling you. And I'm not saying that you have to feel like them, but have the courage and the confidence that you do have a good story to share, and you have insight from your own experience to share. People are looking for takeaways that they can apply in their careers or at work. So they're just looking for different insight, but it can be really overwhelming. Sarah mentioned one of the things you can do. I've seen this, a ton of people do this. If you do get accepted for a talk, or you're thinking about a talk, go do a bunch of mini versions of it at meetups. Or just keep pitching it to people and keep refining it. One of the things I've done too is I reach out to attendees who have been to the conference before, and I say, what do you think about this? Is this something that other attendees would want to see? And I get their feedback even before I submit. So.
Yeah, I think that also you can, especially at smaller conferences, you can reach out directly to the program committee and be like, hey, so what are you guys looking for this year? And oftentimes they'll actually reply and like tell you what they're looking for. And you're like, okay. And I'll tell you a secret, which is that almost all of my tech talks I submitted because I wanted to learn about the topic, not because I knew about it already. And only after it was accepted did I decide, well, okay, I guess I better learn about it now. So I did that for Fluent last year. It was like one of those I would like to learn about Backbone.js. So I actually submitted a couple of talks. I did one at RailsConf, which was in May, and then one at Fluent, which was a couple weeks later. And I knew a lot about Backbone.js by the time I was done with that. A lot. So that was super useful for me.
So the word story and storytelling has come up a few times. Can you give some examples of either good stories you've told or good ones that you've seen that really made you glad that was there, that you were glad to see it in an event?
I feel
what
like
makes a good story?
Well, I guess my talk was technical, but it was also more of a story about the right way to teach front-end code, or at least front-end JavaScript, because at the end of the talk, my expectation wasn't for people to ask me about the intricacies of JavaScript or why I put semicolons here and not there. That wasn't the point. My discussion was really about what's the best way to bring on a younger dev? What's the best way to bring someone onto a new project? Because that's really what I focus on in my job, is making sure that our code progresses forward with our team. And so kind of bringing down the point of like why you're writing the code and like what you're doing is important. People actually start to realize that that's really interesting. And it was cool because one of the questions that I had at the end of the talk was from a senior developer who was bringing someone else on. And one of his questions was really, so what's the difference between you learning object-oriented and functional programming? And that generally doesn't come up in a tech talk at a conference. That's like a one-on-one executive talking to an executive or a team manager talking to a team manager. And I was super appreciative of that because that's really what I wanted people to start thinking about, is that, you know what, I come from an object-oriented programming standpoint, and learning functional was really hard and really different. And you know, there's ways to make it easier and make the transition better. So I guess that's a story.
I just have a question there and lost it. Oh, okay. So how have you come up with topics in the first place? And does that change depending on whether you're doing something kind of small scale, like a lightning talk or a lunchtime talk, versus a conference? I mean, I'm sure it does, but what are the adjustments that you would make depending on what level of scope and audience that you're dealing with? Let's start with, how do you come up with a topic?
So sometimes I'm just like, that seems like a really cool idea. So the first topic I submitted to South by was how sci-fi shapes the internet, because I thought it was a really cool topic. I ended up doing a lot of research. I cited a lot of movies. Of course, Star Trek was in there. But that was in 2010, and I've done a lot of talking since then. And what I realized, though, is what you talk about, people will know you for. So make sure. Because then as people are like, tell us more about sci-fi. And I'm like, oh, oops.
That was 2 years ago.
So you may want to, like as Sarah said, focus on something that you already want to get to know more about, or that you have a passion for. I think that's a really good starting place. Otherwise, if it's stuff you've already mastered, you may go, oh, I already know it. But if it's something maybe that you're helping someone with, make sure you have passion behind it so that you can endlessly think of new ideas.
And I also think, just to add to that a little bit, is that when you're learning something, that's the best time to do a talk about it. Like, not when you're already the expert. When you're learning something, you've got that beginner's mind. Like, you remember what it's like to have learned it, and therefore you are in a better position to teach it to somebody else. So don't wait until you're an expert, right? If you're like learning something with someone, and you have gone through this thought process of like, here's how I learned this, that's like perfect time to put it into a talk.
And one more addition to that is that one of the things that really helped me is to blog about what I'm learning about, and I take those blog posts, which contains that information that I was going through at that moment, and use those blog posts as a proposal for to help me create these talk proposals, because I usually can take this blog post, and the 2 talks I have done was based on one blog post that I did about learning Python and Django, and I was able to submit my proposal for the conference, and I used it as like submit more information here. I put it in the blog post, and so they already had this like full outline of what I was talking about. And I was originally afraid that because I already put like the whole information up online, that they would be like, oh, that's already up there. We want something new. But they actually really liked that, and no one in that room had ever read that blog post. But I think it lended credibility to the conference organizers that I could speak about that topic, because those 2 conferences I had never spoken before. There's nothing online about me speaking. And I still haven't looked at the videos from the conferences either. It's kind of scary. But it's good to blog about stuff and do conference talks off of that.
Right, again, coming back to this idea of like conference organizers want to know that you're not going to just get up there and like freeze. If you can put words together like in a written format, like that's probably a good point in your favor that you could put words together in a spoken format.
One of the strategies I took, because this was my first tech talk that I had put together, was I went back to conferences I'd attended and watched people online of the talks that I remembered, because obviously that was something that was important and compelling. And I actually used a couple different templates. I call them templates, but other people's talks and how they paced it and how they described the same situation. And lessons learned is what I think of as like a beginner template, where you can any topic can be applied to a lessons learned talk. You really just are saying, okay, I tried this new package, and here are 3 things I would have not done or done better, and that's the talk. Like, that's the real crux of it. So I recommend looking at, most conferences have either slide decks or videos online. Just go check out stuff and see what's compelling to you. it's probably the way you want to do it.
Yeah, we've gotten good feedback too on not just lessons learned, but also pain points, something that you've had to work through. And that's kind of a story as well. So
Three Little Bears is a very useful one, right? Like, I tried this thing and it was way too hot. It was way too cold. And then I tried this thing and it was perfect.
Just right.
Right? So that is like, I've heard that talk done 100 times on different topics, and it's always compelling because it's a whole story. Right? There's a reason that's an iconic story.
And I would be afraid about speaking on something that you saw at another conference. There's one I submitted. I'm trying to talk at other conferences, and it's based on a conference talk I saw at a conference, and it kind of it wasn't the way I'd want to go about it. And I thought that I could do better information. Or not to say like I can do it better, but it got me kind of riled up, and so I got really enthusiastic about trying to submit something similar on that same topic, but it has a completely different point of view. So I mean, I guess it's like, don't be afraid about looking at what's out there already and be like, oh, that someone already did something like this, so I can't do that at all. But maybe you can give a different type of point of view on that topic.
More thoughts on that? Okay, let's take a break for 10 minutes, and we'll come back and do our second session of panel discussion. Is some Q&A from the audience over? Okay, thank you. Well, welcome back. We're going to start part 2 of the panel. Pamela Fox has joined us, and I'm going to start by having her introduce herself. Tell us a little bit about your background in public speaking.
Hi. Let's see. So I, coming out of college, I started working at Google in developer relations. And developer relations is basically you're acting as a middleman between the engineers in the company and all the external developers that are using your product. And it means that you do a lot of coding, you do a lot of writing of articles and blog posts, and you also do a lot of speaking because you're trying to speak to developers at developer conferences and show them how to use your product. So I was working on the Maps API, so for like 4 years I would go to conferences and show off pretty maps and not so pretty maps, because some people like to record death. It was pretty awesome, not the death. So then after that, I also worked on the Wave APIs, and then of course Google killed that in a horribly mean way. So I quit, and very emotional. It was like my first heartbreak. Don't tell my exes that. And then I spent a year just hermit hacking around Soma. And then I realized it's actually really, really lonely if you never interact with anybody else. So now I'm working at Coursera as a front-end developer, and I actually get to interact with people. And it's interesting because it's been a while since I've interacted with people. But yeah, so I like giving. So now that it's not actually part of my job description to give talks, I still like to give talks because it's fun, and it's a really good learning experience. As Sarah was saying, like to give a talk about something, you'll learn so much more about it because you'll feel like you need that. So yeah, I think it's fun. I like it.
So we've talked a lot in the first session about conferences. Let's kind of step back and talk about beginning. Things like lightning talks or other opportunities to start, like for instance lunchtime talks. Pamela, you have given a lot of talks and said that you're very enthusiastic about lightning talks. Talk a bit about entering that and what makes a good lightning talk.
So lightning talks are really fun because they're short and they're low pressure, and if it's only 5 minutes, so if it was horrible, whatever, it doesn't have to last too long. So lightning talks are great both from a presenter perspective and an audience perspective, and that's why people love lightning talks, because like as somebody organizing, you're like, oh well, I don't have to worry if this person isn't such a great speaker because they'll be gone in 5 minutes, right? So it's a win-win for everyone, right? Like in the future world, just every talk will be a lightning talk. But it's a good way to getting started. And one thing I'd encourage, actually, if any of you guys actually work for companies, one thing I did when I was at Google was that I just organized monthly lightning talks, and I just encouraged people at Google to just give talks on random things, like around stuff about beer and mechanical devices and technical things and Linux tricks, and it was just all over the board. And we'd actually finish each one of those lightning talks with a PowerPoint karaoke. So PowerPoint karaoke, you pick a random, not just random, I spent hours looking for them, but you pick a slide deck and you give it to the person to present, and they've never seen it before. And so this is not for, I don't recommend this for beginners, I recommend this for comedians. But I would spend hours trying to find the perfect deck, right? I think there were decks about like becoming a ballerina presented by one of our male engineers who did quite well with that. But yeah, so if you guys are at a company and one way of getting started with lightning talks is to say like, let's organize a company lightning talks, right? So it's a good excuse for you guys to share knowledge, right? We do, at Coursera, we don't do lightning talks, but we do show and tells every Monday, which is like, you know, really casual, but still an opportunity for somebody to present something that they learned in the last week. So just think of it as like a TIL for your company. So you can start there, and there's also lots of meetups around here that have lightning talks, like Pie Ladies does a lot of them. So lightning talks are a great way of getting started.
Women Who Code does lightning talks.
Yes.
Okay, so you've talked about, like, for instance, Coursera, you do talks there. Do you have colleagues that you do talks for, or who help you develop your topic or your abstract? People who are kind of collaborating with you at work? I see a couple of nods. Ipsheeta?
Yeah, so we have a one-room open office, so every time someone's having a conversation, it's generally a group conversation, which is fun. So when I was developing the Backbone talk, or the JavaScript talk, I pretty much asked everyone in our office, you know, what do you think of this? Would you want to hear about this? Do you think people don't know this particular thing? But one of the things that we do that's similar to like lightning talks is we'll do teachbacks, and we actually force our interns to do teachbacks, which is really stressful for them, but really fun for us. It's actually really good for us to realize whether we taught them what we intended to teach them, if they're able to teach it back to us. So that's a pretty regular Friday thing that we try to do with our interns. And I didn't give my talk to my company before I gave it because I was really nervous. But it's probably a good recommendation to try that in front of your friends or in front of your team.
Yeah, I do that. Like my very first talk that I gave at a real conference was 2008, and I did a version for the SF Ruby meetup ahead of time because I was so nervous about it. I knew the organizer of the SF Ruby meetup, and I was like, is it okay if I show up and have this talk that's sort of like not really formed and I ask for people to give me my opinions? He was like, that sounds awesome. So it might have even been here now that I think about it. But I did the talk, and I got a lot of really great feedback. And like the talk that I gave at the conference was a lot better because of the preview version that I had done. And for the keynote that I did last month, I did the same thing, but I did it sort of within my company. So I did a preview for my company that was really, really early, like a really sort of like, here's a bunch of information kind of talk. And then because I wanted to see like, what do people respond to? What parts of this topic are people interested in, and what parts did they just not even notice in the talk? And then I used that to refine another version. So the version I ended up giving at RubyConf was, in my opinion, really good, and it was much better than the version I gave to my internal colleagues. So I think that, like, for me, the more I can say it out loud, the more number of times I say it out loud, like not just in my head, but like out loud even to my cat or a stuffed animal, but preferably to people, like the better it gets.
So at one point you had your first tech talk. What's some advice that you would give to somebody doing their first tech talk?
I'm good at this because I've only done a few. One of the things that was really surprising me at the tech talk is that during the talk, until you get comfortable speaking, which is, at least for me, doesn't only very recently happened in small talks, is that my mind goes blank while speaking. I'll be speaking and I'll be flowing eloquently, but I don't remember a thing that's going on. And after the talk, I'll step off stage, and I'll be like, "What just happened?" Like it's a really weird sensation because it's just you're so nervous while speaking that it's really hard to keep the memory going. So people said the talk went okay. I'd have to ask them. And so this happened for the first two big tech talks and my small ones, and only the last couple small ones that I did. Finally, I was like, I guess I calmed down enough that I was comfortable speaking, and then I would be able to retain that memory and have a lot better time speaking. So that was something that was completely unexpected to me as a new speaker. Just as aware, it's an interesting sensation. It just takes a couple talks to get over it. So a little odd.
I still freak out before every talk. Like, right, like the 5 minutes before I'm about to give a talk, like I have every bodily urge ever. I just want to go up to the organizer and just beg them, like, no, I can't go on there. You don't understand how many things are going to... and it's just the worst, and it happens for every talk. And I'm just dying to start because I know, like, when I start, and then at least for me, adrenaline kicks in. And then, like, 5 minutes in, like, all those, everything is completely fine, going great. And then I can just, go for hours, and then I just won't sleep. So don't worry about freaking out, because you probably won't freak out as much as I did.
I have the same adrenaline rush, and actually what I would do next time, and my advice to other people, is I end up talking really fast when I'm nervous.
Oh yeah, me too.
So my 20-minute talk was like 12 minutes.
That's totally happened to me. Oh my God.
So it might be a good suggestion to kind of like watch the time, and also before you give your talk, like put down like a marker or a couple markers in your talk that are transition periods where you're like, breathe. Okay, let me move on to this next thing.
I actually put slides in my talk. They're like a picture of the lake, the sunset, and at the top it says "Remember to breathe."
Or like cat
and I was like, and
I
that's a
did
reminder
cat
to me.
pictures.
Yeah.
Cat pictures. That's
I would
what
have cat breaks in between, and I would say it was for the audience, just so they get them to laugh because I'm talking about technical stuff. But really, it was for me to remember to breathe and have a little fun in the middle of the talk. So people seem to like, cute cat pictures and stuff.
Well, and something else, I would also encourage people to seek professional help. I mean, I luckily, working at O'Reilly, we do often bring in professional speaker trainers, and so that's something to think about. I mean, it really does help you. I felt a lot more prepared. I mean, I know it's not showing right now, but I probably would not have gotten up on stage if I didn't have that. And so Toastmasters is a great organization if you really want to get professional help. It really will help you get better more quickly and help you deal with a lot of the issues that you may have or may not even be aware that you have.
Yeah, and when it comes to practice, a lot of people mention practicing within their workspace, but if you're like me and I work solo, PyLadies or women who code, I know for DjangoCon, my ex-co-founder Julia, she was going speaking at DjangoCon and wanted to practice for her talk. So she actually went to PyLadies and said, hey, I want to practice this. And so PyLadies created a mini PyCon. Mini DjangoCon just for her. So we brought in other people who were speaking, and then I just did a random talk, even though I wasn't speaking at DjangoCon, and they kind of just based this on the fact that Julie said, I'm doing this talk, and I want to have other people review it. And so, that's why Women Who Code or PyLadies and whatnot, even if they don't have something going on, they might take that opportunity to create like a little mini event. And really, it was just like 10 or 15 people in a room. We just did our talks and got good feedback. So maybe reach out to other organizations near you to have that practice beforehand, which is so helpful.
Yeah, and when it comes to structuring your talk, you want to think about some templates like Ipsheeta had mentioned earlier that work, like the hero's journey. That's pretty much the basis of every good movie, including the Bible, right? So there's someone, they encounter an issue, they have to determine if they're going to, face that challenge head on. What's on the other side if they do? Okay, they climb a hill, I don't know, they kill some monster, something happens. Okay, great. Okay, and then they come home and everybody's happy. So basically, people just want to hear that template. So how can you apply that to your experiences and make it compelling? The other thing, too, is if you're going to be doing live coding demos, run through those and just have a video screencast backup just in case something blows up. And you may just want to run the video instead so you can talk through it without trying to have to code and talk at the same time, especially if it's your first time.
I would never do a live coding demo. I mean, I don't know. I've done dozens of talks. I would never do a live coding demo. I do a screencast instead, like play the screencast. All the people that do things that look like live coding, you can see these videos, almost none of them are actually live coding. They're all like recorded a little, like seriously, 15-second screencast, right? They put it right in the middle of their slides. And if you see the video of them doing the talk, they're actually up there like gesticulating. It's really obvious that they're not typing. But if you just see the video, sometimes it's like not obvious that like they're not just doing. They're never just doing. Almost never.
So I would usually, if I want to show code, because it's fun to show code, because then you can interact with code and do funny things with it. So I typically, if I'm doing something that I want to show code, I'll usually use like an HTML5 slide deck and then embed the code in the slides and then use Code Mirror and make it runnable so that I could actually run the code inside the slides, pop up and stuff, and then actually play around with the parameters, right? So playing around with parameters is easy, right? And you customize it to the audience, right? A bunch of dudes are like, I'm going to search for beer now. And they love it, right? Or the other thing to do is just to save your code at every step, right? So you might, like when I show like App Engine, I've got this guestbook example which has 10 steps, and all I have to do is switch out this one line in the configuration to show the next step. So it's all pre-coded, but each step is done along the way. So there you kind of have the coding, but you don't have to worry about actually, and just having to sit there and watch you type the whole thing out just gets really boring.
So, Adria, you brought up earlier imposter syndrome, and Pamela, who's done about 150 talks, is it? Still experiences fear. How do you deal with the fear of public speaking? It's the most common phobia there is, so I suspect that all or most of you have dealt with it. Does it ever go away? How do you kind of squash it? How does it affect you, and how do you make your talk good despite whatever's going on for you?
I mean, this is the obvious answer, but practice helps so much.
Out loud.
I practice out loud, practice other people, practice with Toastmasters, practice in front of your coworkers. You can never expect to be on your first public speaking talk and not be nervous. But then practice is the only way that I found that will make it go away.
Two ideas. So I used to be really shy, especially when it came to public speaking, and I knew in order to get across my message and help other people, I would actually have to be able to publicly speak. So I began doing a live webcast every day where I would talk about a technical topic. And I remember the first time when people started signing on to my Ustream channel, at first it said there were 3 people. Then it said there were like 17 people. And there were like 20-something people. And I'm like, oh my God, they're all watching me. And I'm in my living room by myself, but the fear of knowing they were all watching me, it was so overwhelming. This is probably 2008, 2009, but it's just like I was speaking somewhere. And it got easier. And I could go for a whole hour, and I'm like, oh, hey, folks, I'm on again today. And, sometimes I'd be like, have random thoughts. Hey, I'm streaming. I tweet it and just start talking. And so it became a lot easier. So if you can't always, gather around your coworkers or you feel some inspiration, or put up a video. One of the videos I submitted for a talk that I just gave on Sunday, I was originally going to put it as unlisted on YouTube, but then I just made it public. And I actually got a lot of good feedback about it, which I was able to blog about before my talk was accepted.
So that's an example of doing a tech talk that's not live in front of an audience. What about things like, say, podcasting, other ways to get your message across that don't involve having to look out into an audience?
Yeah, I've done a lot. I'm a consultant, but the type of consulting that I do is actually more like teaching. Like we work with clients, and their client developers come into our office, and we pair program with them all the time, right? So we're spending 8 hours a day explaining to them how it is that you write software that doesn't suck. And that's a harder question than it seems like. And so what I found was that teaching in general was a great way for me to, even just one-on-one, was a great way for me to become more articulate about how to explain different things. And so even just tutoring someone or doing something like with another person where you have to explain technical topics, for me made the public speaking easier because it removed that, it made me much more able to sort of spontaneously explain things. Sounds like an odd talent, but apparently it's useful.
So public speaking you found something that's useful for the audience, essentially. What do you get out of public speaking? Why do this? Because you do have all this time that you're putting into it, there's nerves. What are you getting back out of it? What makes it worthwhile?
Well, like Sarah mentioned, you learn what you wanted to learn that you proposed. For us, this was my first talk, and I was kind of excited to start really being a web presence, and I've started to tweet more now about technical software stuff that I find that's actually really useful. My Twitter handle is FTW Ipsheeta. But yeah, it was kind of a starting point for me to be a public image for our company, which is something that's really important because, like Pivotal, we work with clients, and it's always nice to have your name out there. But also, it was gratifying to be able to teach something that I may not have thought was useful, but from the experience and feedback that I got from my audience, it was like, wow, they actually did get it, and wow, that was kind of useful to them and made me feel pretty proud.
I think part of it for me is that because I think I code because I like to be creative, and coding is a way of creating things. But we have so many different ways of creating things, so we can write stuff and tweet stuff, and that's a form of creativity. But speaking is like a performance, and that's also a form of creating something, but it's a very different form where it's like this, it's a performance, it happens, it's done, you get this rush during it, and you can look back on it, right? I can't really look back on my code. I can look on the bugs and the features. But it's just like it's a different form of creating something that has like a very different lifetime to it and stuff like that. So it's all of that stuff. But I think it's also just a different sort of thing you can produce in the world, and it's really cool to be able to do that. Like I have no singing talent whatsoever, but I can still just copy Pink's haircut and then do a talk and pretend I'm a rock star.
For me, it was really just personal development. I have been spending about 2 years asking other women to speak and not speaking myself, and it just felt really weird, and I thought it really needs to step up. I want to be a good public speaker. I think it's a great skill to have just for myself, and it's creative and it's fun. You get to spread the word about whatever project you want. Like I want more women to speak at conferences, so I can ask all of you in a way that's much more quickly than writing you all an email, and now I know you and you know me. So it expands my network too. So that's very rewarding for me.
And just like when you're at conferences, I gave a talk once about being shy and all shyness hacks around it. And one of my big hacks is that whenever I'm at a conference, I always speak. Because when you speak, everybody knows your face, and then they'll come up to you and they'll have something to talk to you about. And that for me is so much easier than having to go up to people and figure out what to say to them. I'd rather have the people come to me. It's just, from a shyness perspective, much, much better, right? So if I'm going to go to a conference, I try and speak. Like, yeah, it does mean a bit more work, but it means a lot less work in terms of meeting the people and chatting with people afterwards.
You get in for free.
Yes, there's that too.
And to add
For most.
We'll revisit that.
I wanted to add to what you said about making a public face for your company. For me, it's more like job security. Like, I'm serious. I know, but it's like it's like so. I started doing Ruby right after my daughter was born. My daughter was about 1.5 years old when I figured out that I didn't want to be a stay-at-home parent. And I was like, okay, I'll go back to programming. The problem was no one would interview me because I had I had this gap in my resume where I was trying the whole stay-at-home parent thing. And I finally found someone that would take a chance on me, and that was awesome. And I got into Ruby. And then after a while, I was like, you know what? If I was one of those people who blogged or tweeted or something like that, I wouldn't have had that problem getting a job yet. And I'm now at the point where I don't have a problem getting a job. Like if Pivotal went out of business tomorrow, I could call somebody and have, contract work within a couple of hours. And for me, as someone with a family, that was really valuable. Like that job security of it doesn't really matter what company I'm working for, I can always get another job. And so for me, building that public persona was more useful personally than it was sort of for, because I'm not at a startup. I'm not at a company that I own. And so for me, it was just more personal job security.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it's really, as being a startup, being solo in a startup, and also do freelancing and whatnot, it's having people know about you makes it a lot easier. Having a Twitter account with followers and stuff, and that sounds kind of weird, but it did make things a lot easier when I'm trying to find work. The other reason why I personally speak is also kind of the challenge. I was totally shy where I'd walk into a conference and get freaked out and I'd leave because I didn't know anyone. So it's been kind of a personal challenge to get up on stage and speak and really get through with that, because I actually really love telling stories. My boyfriend likes to tease me a lot because I'll just tell stories on and on and on. And he's like, yeah, get to the point of the story. I really like telling stories, and so I've kind of been trying to combine those three things, kind of speak more at conferences and get more confidence, and I can tell the stories I'm really passionate about, and then it just happens to be that it's made my professional life a little easier too.
Yeah, and for me, my number one goal has been to empower people through technology, because it's been so amazing in my life. When I got my first computer, just my life changed. And although I've tried writing and blogging, I actually started blogging because my friend Scott Hanselman he wrote a blog post on this, but he says you only have so many keystrokes in your fingers before you're not going to be able to type anymore. So he explains how it's better to do a blog post, even if you're planning to write the same thing to someone else, and then just link them to it, because now you can help so many more people. And I started making YouTube videos kind of for the same reason. Rather than create a document of screenshots for my clients that I was consulting with, I could just make a video and explain it, and then show them what to do. And then other people started liking and enjoying these videos, so I just feel like speaking is a more powerful medium to connect with people and share ideas.
So, Ipsheeta, you made a comment earlier about the free ticket, right?
Oh,
okay. So
I've just heard that not every conference is sponsored.
Right. So let's cover this. Do conferences pay you? Do they cover travel expenses? What can you expect for a conference to help you do that talk?
So most seem to cover travel expenses, and they'll try to help out. But the ones that don't, and I ran into this when I was speaking at JangoCon. I'm being a freelancer. I don't make that much money, and so flying to Portland and doing a ticket and whatnot. Like I really want to speak with them, and they told me I was accepted, but they're like, okay, they said that they have a policy where speakers have to pay for everything too. They're trying to make it very equal. So I was able to, so that was like a very discouraging at first. But I was able to say like, hey, here's my situation, and then every conference that makes you pay for things, they always have resources for if you can't. So they were able to hook me up with Mozilla, and Mozilla was able to help sponsor me to go to that conference, which normally as a speaker I wouldn't be able to go to. So if you're afraid about speaking at a conference because they say speakers must cover travel expenses and conference ticket and whatnot, never be afraid to ask to see if there are sponsors that would help you out, especially as a women speaker, because they need those people to speak.
Okay, I think Ruby conferences are a little bit different in that they will always, I've never spoken at a conference where they asked me to actually pay for a ticket. That seems really weird to me, but I've also never had them offer to pay travel expenses. So I think it depends on the technical community you're in as to what sort of the norms are. Yeah. On the other hand, I've never asked for travel expenses because I've always worked for a company that would pay for my way there. Like Pivotal pays for my way out and pays for my hotel and all that stuff. But if I was not in that situation, I know that people, I know people who are Ruby speakers who are not in that situation, and they've pushed back and been like, hey, I'd love to come do this talk that you guys are super excited about, but it's going to cost me $600 for the flight ticket. Almost always they'll be like, okay, we'll find a sponsor for that.
Yeah.
Like, just send us your receipts. So if you like ask, which for me is like super hard because I don't know, I guess I have like weird things around money and like asking for money, but the couple of times that I've heard people do that, it seems like it's always worked out. So, but the asking is the hard part, I think.
Well, even if you're not speaking, I mean, we're talking about speaking here, but I was able to go to JangoCon this year, not speaking, through Pie Ladies. They had sponsorships.
O'Reilly is that way. We offer expenses only if it's an ask. So it's a case-by-case basis because a lot of companies do pay the way. So, but asking is the way to go.
Yeah, never be afraid to ask.
Yeah. Even if it feels uncomfortable. And especially more and more, we're going to start seeing it where we're not just speaking in the United States. Even if we're just crossing the border to Canada, we're going overseas, this is going to become a bigger and bigger issue. So definitely ask. You can also do research. If you know someone else who has spoken there, kind of ask about that as well. And then the other thing, too, is based on if you submit during the CFP, that's great, but sometimes they may reach out to you later and ask you to speak. Then you'll encounter things like a shortage of hotel rooms. So I would start checking those Twitter hashtags and seeing who the list of attendees are and seeing if you could, share a room. So that's definitely worked out for me several times in the past. And I've also shared.
I think also don't wait until, you don't need to, I would wait until the talk's been accepted to ask. Like, one of the things that, it's not that they're going to make their decision differently based on whether or not you need money, but they've always, even if they accept your talk and then you're like, oh, I'd love to come, but I have travel expenses, that's totally normal. Like, it's not like you're blackmailing them or putting them in an awkward place. Because they've always got other people that they've sort of lined up as in case, because speakers drop out for lots of different reasons, even after they've submitted a talk. So don't be afraid to submit a talk, even if you're not entirely sure that you can afford to go. Submit the talk, and then once it's accepted, then be like, hey, I would love to come do this talk. Plane ticket's going to run about blah. Do you think you can cover that? So.
And from the other aspect too, if you work for a company and you haven't submitted any technical talks but you want to, you should give them a heads up. There are a lot of Dreamforce is one. I'm sure O'Reilly probably has a PDF as well, but they create these documents that you can give to your employers justifying, one, why you should attend, and two, why you can speak. A lot of companies overlook the influence that having someone from their company can have speaking at a conference like this. So oftentimes marketing will be like, oh, look, we can sponsor this. But instead, talking about a topic that the attendees care about is one of the most effective ways to get that attention.
Works a lot better than a sponsor table a lot of times. It's actually more effective than sponsoring often.
So let's talk about some logistical stuff. What do you need to make sure you do before your talk? What do you need to bring, set up? What do you need to ask? How do you make sure that it's just going to go smoothly?
Well, expect that all preparations that you do, something will go wrong even if you do preparation. So have a worst case scenario plan just in case. I mean, don't do code live, have a backup like they mentioned, because, something random that never happened before could happen during the talk. So make sure to have a very, very worst case scenario for the situation.
And the Wi-Fi goes down at every conference, right?
Always.
As much as you make them swear that it's going to be the best Wi-Fi in the world. I remember in the Philippines once, we got every Wi-Fi company in that country to come to our event. The Wi-Fi still went down, right? Using every resource we possibly could. So that's why it's good to have your stuff locally. And also, I'm always guilty of not doing this, but don't assume that once you get to the conference, you'll be able to sit there and do lots of work and da-da-da. Because you sit there and be like, oh, right, there's no Wi-Fi. Oh, I can't work on my slides. So you really should be getting your slides done before you get to the conference. Or, look, if you're not sure, just stay in your hotel room, right? Your hotel room is often a safer place than the conference. Wi-Fi-wise, distraction-wise. If you don't have your slides done, you know what? Yeah, you should have gotten them done before, yada, yada, yada. But, maybe you're busy working or whatever. If you don't have your slides done, just hide in the room and work on them, right? It's better to, skip out on those few talks and feel more confident than when you're going up than to say to yourself, okay, I'll sit in the back of the room and work on them.
That never works out.
It
never works out. I keep thinking it will, and it never does.
So I usually assume that, I never plan to go, I'll look at when my talk, so in terms of planning, I usually ask to give a talk early on in the conference, because also if you give a talk early on the conference, in line of the shyness hacks things, it means that more people will have more opportunities to talk to you because they'll see you early on, right? And it also means you won't miss out on the rest of the conference because if my thing is at the end of the second day, well, I'm just spending those 2 days hiding in the hotel room, right? But if it's at the beginning of the first day, well, somehow I would have been in the hotel room the day before, right? And then I can actually enjoy the rest of the conference, right? I find it very hard to enjoy the conference before. Maybe middle of the first day is perfect. But I usually do specifically ask for time based on those sort of logistics.
And for things you should ask for after your talk gets accepted, or things you should be expecting, the dimensions of the slides, whether they're going to be standard or kind of the long HD ones, whether you'll have a handheld or a lapel mic, how the image will be projected, if you'll need to bring your own clicker or not. You should have multiple copies of your slide presentation, even if you sent them one already. You should put one in Dropbox and keep one on a flash drive, because who knows, maybe your plane could crash, you'd have to swim out of, you never know, something, speaking of Philippines, maybe overseas, you never know, just be really prepared. And as soon as you get to the conference location, also ask where you're speaking, because you can probably look at a diagram, a floor plan, beforehand. And then once you get there, I always try to walk the area I'm going to be speaking as soon as possible.
Going into the room is so helpful.
Yeah.
Before both my talks, I had to talk immediately after a keynote, and my room was the other room. And so I was able to sit in the room, this empty room, at its front, and just feel comfortable with that space before I had to go on and speak. This is the very first talk I did, and that was so helpful, just to be in that room and kind of visualize the people down there and calm myself before everyone came in, rather than coming in. And then I was also able to get my slides working. I had the mic working, because people in there working beforehand. So I didn't see that keynote. I just I would. Both conferences, the conference, the session beforehand, it just was a wash, because the session right before mine, I was preparing for that talk. And spending that time is really valuable rather than attending that talk and then rushing in and trying to get everything set up.
So this gives an idea of what to expect of the conference and the organizers. What about the flip side of that? What does the conference usually expect of a speaker? And Suzanne, look, you can talk to that, I think.
Well, we expect them to be prepared, even if it's the last minute, and we leave it up to the speaker as far as the other things. Obviously we expect a great talk. We are lucky in that we have a pretty interactive conference system where people can leave comments, people can rate the sessions, and the speaker will get a copy of all of the comments so is able to respond back. So we do hope that the speakers will respond personally to any kind of feedback or questions that people might have. At a lot of our conferences, we have opportunities now for speakers to meet in much smaller groups with attendees called office hours, and so we hope that people will participate there. It helps with the shyness factor. But that's really about it. If people want to rush in at the last minute, give their wonderful talk, and then leave, that's okay too. We hope that they'll also help promote the conference in advance, let people know that they're speaking. That would be really wonderful too.
So I think that, like you said, right, what you really want is for people to give a good talk. And so I think that sometimes I've submitted a talk and they've accepted it, and then as I prepare the talk, I realize that I don't actually want to talk about exactly what I proposed, and that's fine, right? They want me to give a good talk. They don't want me to necessarily give exactly the talk that I proposed. If as I'm doing a talk, I can find that it's better if I change the topic a little bit, not completely change and talk about a completely different language in a complete, but if the topic needs to shift a little bit from what I originally proposed, I think, in most cases, the conference organizer would rather I give a better talk on a slightly different topic than stick to the topic that I proposed and have it not be as good.
Just to build on that a little bit, though, I think definitely if you're adjusting it for the audience that's specifically there, some of the feedback that we get pretty regularly is the talk didn't match the description. And so titles are very important to be very descriptive. Clever titles are great, but if it doesn't really say what's going to be spoken about during the talk, that's difficult. So yeah, if it's adjusting to definitely, but again, from a conference organizer perspective, we get dinged for that sometimes.
I think that might be a difference between a multi-track and a single-track conference also, because a lot of the conferences I go to are single-track, where they're more, maybe that's where they have more emphasis on it needs to be a good talk, because that's the only talk they can go to. Right. It's not like they're choosing based on the description, right?
Conference organizers usually don't want you to hide in the hotel room as much as I do. They usually want you to be speaking with the attendees. I would say that you're most useful after you've given your talk because the attendees know who you are then. But they usually they'll tell you about all the after parties, and they'd like you at the after parties because it's an opportunity for people to ask more, or at the speaker center, and especially if you might be the token female that they would like to femailify their after party. So sometimes I feel bad when I skip them, but they do kind of want that. Yeah.
I kind of made a checklist before I gave my talk about little things to do to make a better impact of the talk. And one of them was post my slides up before I give the talk, because everyone's going to ask you where are your slides posted. That's the first thing people ask. It actually, if you give the URL at the beginning of the talk and there is working Wi-Fi, people will follow along and actually stay way more in tune with what you're talking about. And then I signed up on Lanyard because our conference was on Lanyard, and then I posted it on my Twitter, and I asked a bunch of friends to talk about it and respond and be good luck. No, they did that on their own. But and also in my slide deck, I made all the links obviously active and live so that people could see all the references that I was giving, as well as my contact information and a tweet about Backbone tutorials that I thought was really valuable. And all of a sudden, people were instantly able to contact me because my Twitter was actually on the slide deck. So it was kind of my checklist that I went through.
So you've talked about one way of engaging the audience. What are some other ways that you can get people to connect and stay engaged?
I usually like to start off by asking the audience stuff. So how many of you guys have given a talk before? All right. Yay. How many of you like caterpillars? That's weird. No, so usually I have a list of relevant questions to ask. And they're actually, they end up also being really useful, right? Because if you're asking about Backbone, how many of you have experience with Backbone? Actually, when I was giving a Backbone talk the other day, first I asked, how many of you have experience with Backbone? What? The same one who likes caterpillars. But then I asked, how many of you have experience with underscore? Okay, so for those of you who don't know, backbone is written on top of underscore. So there was all these people that didn't raise their hands for underscore, that raised their hands for backbone. I was like, you guys are sketchy individuals that are just making stuff up now. And that's when I realized that there were a lot of people in the audience who were somewhat fibby. So you can ask these questions. The questions are both to turn it into a conversation. So I always like to start off that way, because if you're not connecting with your audience, it's really hard to keep going. Like if I'm giving a talk, sometimes you're in these rooms where you can't even see the audience. Like luckily we're all on the same level here and we're all really close. Like I would move even closer really. But some rooms you'll be in, you can't even see the audience and you're like, who am I speaking to? And if I can't see the audience and get the audience energy, then I feel useless myself and I have no energy to give back. So I always start off with some form of interaction and start the trend of it being interactive and it being a back and forth, and hopefully you can feed off each other. And then usually I'll pick one person to just make eye contact with.
I also ask questions in the middle of the talk, mostly to get people to look up. Like if you ask a question and then you pause, people will look. Even if they're on their laptop or they're on Twitter, they're looking at their phone. If you make some empty space, they will look up. And that gives them an opportunity to sort of refocus. I think that a group of engineers is slightly different from giving a talk to a group of normal people. Because engineers have much shorter attention spans. So you need these things in your talk to help them refocus. Help them help you. So I do the question thing that helps. I also I put in a few visual jokes that I'll just change the slide to the joke slide and then just stop. And for the same reason, people will look up and look at the thing, and then I wait for people to laugh, which is the hardest thing ever, but always actually happens.
And then people hear people laughing, and then they look up too.
Right.
So
it's sort of
brings other people in.
And so there's these little things that I didn't actually even realize I did until maybe a month or two ago when I wrote them all down for someone because someone asked me about them. But all these things that help your audience, which has an abnormally short attention span, focus on what you're saying. Because even an awesome 40-minute talk, if it's all just text stuff, is really hard to focus on. I think it's really hard to focus on, for me anyway. Maybe this is just me, but it's hard for me to focus on code and coding just straight for more than 15 minutes. So I think it's good to sort of have these breaks, and sometimes these are the last things that I put into the talk. I'll do the talk, and I'll have all the technical important content, and then I'll realize, oh, I talked for 10 minutes about code without a break. I should probably put something in the middle there. I'll put a animated GIF of baby pandas sliding down the slide. People love that stuff, and it helps them refocus. Then they, it's a little bit less sort of code stuff all in a row.
Yeah. The question that you want to keep in mind is why should the people care? So one of the strategies the military uses is at the beginning they tell you what they're going to tell you, then they tell you the content, and then they come back and summarize what they just told you. That way you kind of get a table of contents of what you're about to learn. You can judge, okay, do I need to kind of pay attention? You go through the content, and then here's a summary just to kind of reconfirm that. So also, they can make sure that the talk they went to is the one that they want to stay at. Otherwise, they could vote with their feet if they feel that's not the right content for them.
Have you ever felt like you just lost them? I see you nodding.
Well, sometimes you just can't tell. Some audiences are very hard to read. You guys are very reactive, so it's great. Some audience can be very silent. Also, if you're giving talks in other languages, like in Japan, they're all they're getting it translated, so they're sitting there, and so all their reactions are delayed by 3 seconds as well, and that's really, really hard. So some audience are just really hard to read, and so you don't know whether it's that it's just not working, or you don't know if it's just that particular audience. It definitely varies by crowd, by language, by all that stuff. So I think sometimes it has just not worked, and other times it's just been the audience not reacting, and it's really, I find it impossible to tell the difference without actually asking them explicitly afterwards for feedback.
It's hard telling a joke and then having silence. So I've had that happen once, and I was just kept moving on, and the next joke worked out a lot better, so maybe I lost them at that moment. It's hard, but just keep on going.
Yeah, I had a joke that nobody got, and it was like it was the second to last talk of the last day of the conference. I was like, geez, okay, you guys stayed out way too late last night. Nobody got that but me. Like, I made a joke about the fact that the joke didn't work, and then we moved on, and it seemed to go okay.
It's kind of like those like nightmare situations, but you just gotta keep on rolling and then pick them up later.
And have you ever, Tracy, you mentioned preparing for worst case scenario. Has the worst case scenario ever happened to you?
Well, according to Pamela, it would be having all the bodily functions at the same time. So I guess I would say no.
The real true worst case scenario hasn't happened.
I'm not going to comment on this.
My worst case scenario is always someone like getting up at the microphone during the Q&A and being like, you are totally wrong. I'm going to contradict all the stuff that you said. And that has never happened. Although I've kind of like over the years, I guess, come up with my strategy, and my strategy is going to be like, oh, that's an interesting point. Let's talk about that after. Next question.
Yeah, I gotta say, that is a really big fear of mine, is that, like I said, I spoke at these 2 programming conferences while not really knowing much about programming at all. I was still very much a beginner, and I was so afraid of like misspeaking and someone coming up there and be like, you're totally wrong about this. That hadn't happened, and most people are really nice. I did have some people say, okay, this person asked a question and you responded. This is like after the fact, it's one-on-one. They said, okay, it wasn't quite the right answer, and here's the right answer, and I appreciate them coming to me afterwards. I would say that keep in mind that 99% of people are really good people and that they're rooting for you too. So it's really scary thinking that someone's going to come on stage and say, oh, you were wrong. But in my case, one answer I gave that actually was wrong, the person told me afterwards in private. Most people are good people, and it's, it wasn't actually that bad of a situation. I rectified it at the next conference.
Yeah, I had my stomach drop. I was doing a presentation at a meetup group about our API, and so another fear could be someone's asking something I don't know. But I mean, in this case, it was a really good thing because I had been talking and sharing all these examples that someone was like, I wonder if this thing would work too. So they asked, and I just drew a blank. I did not know how to answer them. So I, of course, acknowledged that as a really good question. And then someone else from the audience spoke up and said, well, I would probably look at doing it this way. And, and it was fine. So it was not a challenge against like my knowledge. The talk had actually inspired them to think of a new way of using our API. So don't let that stop you. Your goal is to.
Well, and I also think I don't know is a perfectly legitimate answer, right? The answer could be like, I don't know, I've never actually been in that situation before, but I'd love to hear about it afterwards if you'd like to talk to me.
And say you'll look it up and tell them afterwards, right? I think the question asking part, that can be the scariest part, because that's when you might be in a situation where you don't know. And there's sometimes question asking can be awkward. Like sometimes you'll have these people, the audience members that ask a question and then keep asking and asking another question, and they just dominate the entire question asking thing, and they'll just go on for like 20 minutes. There's a lot of them in the Valley, so I tend not to speak at events, especially free events in the Valley. Just be careful. Not this one. This one's great. There are a few problem individuals, but. That should be something that the conference organizer steps in and says, right, okay, you've had your question, let's move on to the next one, because that's, I don't know, I'm not very good at dealing with that, but that to me has been some of the most awkward of the question asking, is when you just have the people that keep asking and asking and asking.
Or there's some that just tell a story, they don't actually have a question.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is a great opportunity to segue into letting people here ask some questions. We already know that audiences are great about asking very nice questions. We can handle them. So
feel free to tell us we're wrong.
Yeah.
Hey, so sometimes you have talks you don't want to give. So I've been approached with some talks that said no. I'm never giving them. When do you say no and when do you say yes? And when do you reach out for something that you want? What is your experience in that?
So the question was, I don't know if I have a response yet. How do you deal with saying no to a talk that you don't want to give?
No. When have you personally said no, and when have you reached for one that you weren't offering?
Mm-hmm. When have we said no, and when have you reached out for one that you had offered?
Well, sometimes I'll say no to a topic if I feel like there's not enough time. So they've asked me as a last-minute speaker. If I look at the organizers or the history of the conference, and it's a fairly new one, and I don't, travel costs could come into play as well. The topic that they want me to speak on specifically, if I don't feel like that's what I want people to know me for, because you may feel pigeonholed once you start doing some talks. Actors certainly can feel that way as well. And then when it comes to not, asking for something that wasn't offered to you, just ask. Like, there's that great book, Women Don't Ask. We often only see really explicit negotiation opportunities. Get a job, buy a house, buy a car. There's all these other opportunities to just negotiate and ask. So just send an email, send a tweet. Hey, I sure wish so-and-so would ask me to speak. That's all it takes. And then they'll be like, ooh, who's this person? And then that could result in an email. So then if you do have a blog, make sure that it's easy to find your email address. I think that that's also a frustrating. Someone trying to reach someone, there's no phone number, no email. They have to, and if you are sort of shy or, all these things, if someone has to send you a public tweet because there's no other way to get a hold of you, so make your info available.
Yeah, I've had people ask me to do talks about subjects that I wasn't really interested in doing it. I've turned down a decent number of come talk about what it's like to be a woman in tech talks. I've done a few. I've turned down a few as well, partially because it's I don't really, at the time I didn't feel like I could speak from a broader perspective than just my experience. So sometimes in those cases I've been hey, I don't think that this is a great topic for me right now, but I would love to do a talk about Backbone.js. But sometimes it works out. Yeah. And sometimes they're no, we really need someone to do this. And it's okay, well, next time I'd love to do a talk on blah.
Sometimes, you get asked to kind of do the things that are buzzy and hot right now. I was giving some kind of mobile-y talks last year, and so mobile is really hot right now, but I haven't done that in 8 months, so I have no desire to speak about that right now, because I know the web moves really fast, and I know that I basically don't know that much compared to the current state of web technology, right? So if somebody asked me to do a mobile talk today, I'd say no, because I just don't feel comfortable, and yeah, I could do research in it, but that's the kind of talk where I want the practical experience to be up to date, right? So sometimes there are people asking just for kind of the hot topics of the day, and that may not correspond with what you happen to be doing right now. But suggesting suggesting what you do want to talk about is good.
An example of negotiation.
Yeah.
More questions? Yeah.
What kind of tools do you use to review presentations?
I think I'm doing a breakout on that, right?
So the question was, what kind of tools do you use to prepare your presentations? Is that it? Yeah, okay. So, Pamela is actually going to do a breakout session about preparing slide decks, but let's see what other answers come up, and then Pamela will give you a whole half hour or so on that.
I'm an open source contributor, and I'm a big believer in the open web, but I use Keynote because it's easy. Because I can drag the images onto them and resize them, and I know how to do it. If I knew how to do PowerPoint, I probably would have done that, but I have a Mac, so I just use Keynote.
I use Google Doc, or Google Presentation, whatever.
Yeah, it doesn't have the same, I don't know. Yeah, it's fine.
It doesn't transition nearly as pretty.
Yeah.
I'll be honest.
I use Keynote for the slides, but you said Google Docs. I'll use Google Docs document stuff to do my outline of talks, and I take that because it's really easy to share and get comments from people. So I usually take that outline and I share it with people who are close to me to get reviews on that talk and what I was going to say and see if there's anything I'm missing. So I'll use Google Docs for the outline portion.
I'll also export my Keynote as PDF and then put it into Google Docs as yet another backup of my slides, just in case something goes wrong, which is I've used actually once, so which is kind of nerve-wracking.
And they'll give you an iframe snippet to post on your site if you need to publish the document.
Yeah.
I use Keynote, but when forced to PowerPoint, but then I just export my Keynote into PowerPoint, and then I use Evernote to collect information that I want to use for my presentations, as well as a list of speaking ideas. I have that as well, but then each speaking topic has its own notebook as well, and I can go back through, and then I also work on my outline and everything in Evernote as well, because it syncs to all the devices. So while 5 minutes before I'm holding my bodily functions, I can look on my iPhone at my outline and stuff, as well as work on it. So.
I'm also used Prezi before.
Yeah.
before the interface changed.
I use PowerPoint, but just from a conference organizer perspective, if you do use something like Prezi or something that's a little bit different, be sure to let your speaker manager know about that so they can be prepared to run your software.
I also use the Flickr Creative Commons image search, which lets you, there's like the advanced search, which will let you search for photos that have permissions where they allow you to do commercial content, which is sort of a, if you're doing a talk about open source, it's sort of like a legal gray area, whether that's commercial usage or not, but I like to be a little bit conservative, so it's nice to be able to be like, show me pictures in Flickr that are about sunsets and lakes, but are explicitly marked as like, I can use this for commercial
Well,
speech.
especially not during the conference too, but if it's going to be posted later on, it's very important that you're able to use those images.
Another tool I use, but this goes into my will probably go wrong, but it's really nice when it doesn't go wrong, is that they're on the iPhone. When I'm doing presentations with Keynote, there is a Keynote iPhone app. And so when you're doing the presentation, it'll give you like a little, you can slide through your Keynote slides. It'll show what's on screen at the moment and actually show you all your notes. So the times that it's worked out, I don't have I don't have like a large budget, so I can't do a clicker. So I use that for moving slides back and forth to my iPhone, and I'll have my notes right there on my iPhone. But half the time, Bluetooth isn't working or the Wi-Fi isn't working because you have to have a connection with the computer or the Keynote on there. So I kind of expect it not to go wrong, but when it doesn't go wrong, it's actually kind of nice to have.
So I use all those, but I also very often use the HTML5 slide decks. Like there's Deck.js, Fathom.js. Lately I've been using Reveal.js, which actually does output the PDF, which is cool. It just depends on what I'm giving. I've also whiteboarded some of my presentations, so I'll just sit in a cafe and draw pictures for everyone, or I've done charcoal. You can use these, like, depending on what you're talking about, it can be an excuse just to draw, right? Sometimes I just take pictures of my face, and if it's just an emotional story, like for mobile talk, there's a lot of pictures of my face being really sad. So I try and mix the media. So that's why I think it's cool to know all your options, because sometimes Keynote is the best option, right? I'm like, Keynote, right? But other times I want to mix in some of the other things out there, and depending on what you're talking about, what it is you're trying to visualize, if it's diagram heavy, if it's emotion heavy, if it's code heavy, all of those things lend themselves to different formats.
And outside of presentation software, Corinne, you mentioned storytelling. So 2 books that I would mention that will help you to shape your story, which then you put your content into, Presentation Zen and then Beyond Bullet Points. And both encourage the use of images. And remember that the slide deck is really just a supporting actor, but you are the main actor or actress in this case. So people should be paying attention to you. One tip I got from a friend, he presents a lot, is when you want people to pay attention to you, you face forward. When you want them to look at your deck, then you turn sideways. So it's like a kind of visual indicator to them where they should.
So kind of join me in looking at. More questions?
I think this is like super that's hard, it's so shocking. But like, is there anything not obvious about clothes that you wear when you present? Because I'm like, I'm looking, I don't know how you all don't have giant sweat circles right now, but it's something I'm really nervous about.
No,
All right, paraphrase that question.
It's a really good question.
So she was asking about clothes when you're presenting, just essentially like what you're wearing and what. I have to, when I present, I have to feel both comfortable but also feel badass. Like I can't, when I'm at home, I just wear like sweats and a t-shirt half time, like sweatshirt, like really frumpy and whatnot, but I cannot do that. I can't even go to a conference at tech conferences, it's all like guys in t-shirts, right? And I kind of want to just wear like frumpy, like my jeans and just a t-shirt and just like hang out with them, but I don't feel badass. So I always think that a lot of confidence comes from wearing something where you feel, I have to go into, I'm trying not to use the word attractive, but I don't know, it's just like you feel good about what you're wearing. And I think it's really important to instill confidence into speaking. So how to find out the outfit for that and what to wear. For tech conferences, it's like take a look at what other people are wearing. People you look up to, see what they're wearing. That gives me a clue on what to wear. So like a lot of tech conferences, like the really awesome women who are speaking, it's like kind of like jeans, boots, kind of what I'm wearing, like a nice blazer or whatnot over a t-shirt. So you still have that nerdy cred, but you still look good. I mean, it just kind of like for me at least, I always try to like, not be frumpy but still be comfortable, but just give that badass feel to when I'm on stage.
I think a little bit different approach, which is that I wear a dress to make a point.
I do too.
So,
That's awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
I wore a dress for my RubyConf keynote because it made me, I feel like people are going to notice me anyway, right? There's not that many women there. I might as well like really stand out, right? Like I'm going to stand out anyway. I might as well
That gives
really
you a
stand
feel of
out.
confidence too.
Right.
So it's
I
like
wore
a different
like a
version
bright
of
pink
yeah.
dress.
Actually, I wore, to my talk, I wanted to wear jeans because it was cold. So I wore Code Like a Girl on my t-shirt. That was the Yahoo t-shirt I had. And I actually got like, many people were like, where'd you get that shirt from? I totally want it.
I usually, like to wear something that, I mean, on the note of shyness, right? You want to give people something to relate to, right? So I usually so for today, I actually did wear my geek shirt, right? The Android shirt. So if I'm giving a mobile talk, I'll wear this shirt. So basically for every topic, I have a relevant shirt that I wear. And I can't throw them away. Everything else in my wardrobe I throw away. Because then, first it gives somebody an excuse to talk to you, and it also just gives you another thing to refer to during your presentation. Because during the mobile talk, I'd be like, "Oh yeah, he's adorable, but he's also the worst operating system ever, right?" Or something like that. So it just gives you another talking point, right? And one talk we had in New Zealand, everybody gives out swag at conferences, right? So you'll accumulate T-shirts too. So during one talk, I actually wore 5 different shirts, and I just managed to reference each company throughout the talk, and not that it was like a strip show, but that was actually really fun. So I like to have conversation pieces if possible, or there's something that
Yeah, I mean,
related to.
Express your personality because you're a person and you're up there.
Yeah, everyone's different.
Yeah. But at the same time, like bright lights, don't wear thin clothing.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
If
I was
it's
gonna
hot,
say,
like wearing layers, like all these things probably.
Wear tank tops underneath.
Yeah,
Yeah,
really.
and I wear fabric that won't show sweat when I'm doing a talk, just on purpose, right?
Honestly,
Just in case.
I understand the sweaty thing. It's horrible feeling. Even this is like really intimate and whatnot. I feel, don't wear
Really hot lights on.
Yes,
Yeah.
I feel really hot right now.
And the other thing to consider too is you may not need a bunch of different outfits. I mean, let's look at Steve Jobs. And he's not the only one. So you could really just kind of have a whole theme going. And there's some guy developers I know too. They just wear similar, and especially if you work for a company, to wear your company T-shirt if that's relevant. But don't overthink it too much.
You do have to be careful about wearing a mini skirt because one, if you're on a podium and there's people below you, so always wear bike shorts underneath. But I always do that anyway. The other thing is that, well, I remember I wore a mini skirt once and I was giving a talk, and then somebody after referenced the fact that I was clearly in marketing because I wore a mini skirt. But on the other hand, I was kind of proving them wrong too. So just people do have perceptions.
Even shorter skirts on bar stools. If you're giving a panel, for instance, I've seen some really unfortunate. Yeah, I think even bike shorts maybe. But and I've also heard thinking about post event media as well. Video, for instance, white is tough with cameras, and also if you're in a dark stage wearing all black, you kind of tend to be like sometimes maybe a floating head.
I like to wear a lot of color too when speaking. Not I'm doing it right now, but when I'm on stage, I'm trying to pick up bright colors because also afterwards when you're in a swarm of people, it helps people pick you out of the crowd sometimes when you might blend in.
Just color your hair.
Yeah, there we go. I used to have red hair. It was bright red hair, and it was awesome because people would be like, the redhead. But then it got too expensive to color it.
Talk to Pamela later.
I will color for free.
Yeah.
More questions? Okay, so let's, first of all, thank you so much.